Most people run from discomfort, but the ancient Stoics deliberately sought it out. They practiced voluntary hardship, denied themselves pleasures, and embraced suffering as a tool for strength. This wasn't masochism or self-punishment. This was strategic preparation for life's inevitable challenges. The Stoics understood a truth that modern society has forgotten. Comfort is the enemy of growth, and those who avoid all pain will crumble when real adversity strikes. If you're ready to discover why the greatest philosophers in history chose difficulty over ease, and how this forbidden practice can transform your mental resilience forever, leave your like, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, comment below which challenge resonates most with you, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content that will revolutionize how you see life's obstacles. James was successful by every measure society values: six-figure income, luxury apartment, expensive car, and a social media feed that screamed success. But when his company downsized and he lost his job, something shocking happened. This man who had everything fell apart completely. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. His girlfriend left him because he became an anxious mess. His savings disappeared as he desperately tried to maintain his lifestyle. Within 6 months, this supposedly strong man was living with his parents, battling depression, wondering how his life had collapsed so quickly. James had never experienced real hardship, so when it came, he had no tools to handle it. He was like a muscle that had never been exercised, being asked to lift a massive weight. Complete failure was inevitable. Now contrast this with Sarah, a woman who had been practicing something most people would call crazy. Every morning she took cold showers, not because she enjoyed them, but because she hated them. She regularly fasted for 24 hours, not for health reasons, but to practice hunger. She slept on the floor once a week, wore the same clothes for days, and deliberately chose the harder path whenever possible. When her startup failed and she lost her life savings, something remarkable happened. She remained calm, focused, and immediately began planning her next move. While others would have been devastated, Sarah saw it as just another challenge she had been preparing for her entire adult life. The difference between James and Sarah wasn't luck, circumstances, or natural strength. It was preparation. Sarah had trained for disaster. James had trained for comfort. This is the power of what the ancient Stoics called voluntary discomfort, and it might be the most misunderstood practice in all of philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, regularly slept on hard surfaces and ate simple food, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Seneca, one of Rome's wealthiest citizens, would spend days living like a poor man, eating bread and water, wearing rough clothes. Epictetus, who had experienced real slavery and hardship, taught his students to seek out lesser hardships to build their strength. These weren't men who loved suffering. They were strategists who understood that voluntary hardship was the key to freedom. The logic is simple but powerful. Life will bring you pain whether you want it or not. You will face loss, disappointment, failure, and suffering. This is not pessimism, this is reality. The question is not whether you will face hardship, but whether you will be prepared for it when it comes. Every person has two choices. They can experience controlled, voluntary discomfort on their own terms, or they can be destroyed by involuntary suffering when life inevitably brings it. The Stoics chose the first option, and it made them some of the strongest people in human history. Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Comfort is not your friend. Every convenience you add to your life, every source of ease you embrace, every difficulty you avoid is making you weaker. Your ancestors lived in a world where physical hardship was daily reality. They built incredible mental and physical resilience because they had no choice. You live in a world where you can avoid almost every discomfort, and this luxury is destroying your capacity to handle real challenges. The Stoics recognized this thousands of years ago and created practices to compensate for an easy life. Modern neuroscience has proven what the Stoics knew intuitively. Deliberate exposure to manageable stress creates resilience, while avoiding all stress creates fragility. When you deliberately practice discomfort, your brain literally rewires itself to handle adversity better. Your stress response becomes more measured, your emotional regulation improves, and your confidence in your ability to handle difficulties grows exponentially. You stop fearing challenges because you have evidence that you can overcome them. This is not theoretical. This is measurable, practical strengthening of your mental architecture. David discovered this principle accidentally during a power outage that lasted 3 days. For the first day, he was miserable. No internet, no streaming, no air conditioning, just him alone with his thoughts and basic needs. By the third day, something had shifted. He felt calmer, more focused, and strangely more confident than he had in months. When the power returned, he made a decision that his friends thought was insane. He began deliberately unplugging for entire weekends. No phone, no internet, no entertainment, just books, simple food, and his own company. Within months, David noticed that everyday stresses that used to overwhelm him barely registered. He had built a foundation of mental strength by voluntarily embracing what most people desperately avoid. The Stoics had specific practices for building this strength. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. But this wasn't morbid dwelling on disaster. This was strategic preparation through controlled exposure to difficulty. Marcus Aurelius would imagine losing his wealth, his position, even his family, not to torture himself, but to build acceptance and reduce his attachment to external things. Seneca would regularly live below his means, eating simple food and wearing plain clothes, to prove to himself that he could be happy with less. These practices weren't about becoming pessimistic. They were about becoming anti-fragile. Rachel learned this lesson through unexpected circumstances. She was preparing for a marathon when she injured her ankle and couldn't run for months. Instead of wallowing, she decided to use this setback as an opportunity to practice mental resilience. She began waking up at 5 a.m. even though she couldn't exercise. She started intermittent fasting, not for weight loss, but for mental discipline. She took cold showers and spent time in meditation, treating her injury as a chance to build inner strength. When she finally could run again, she was not just physically recovered, but mentally transformed. The woman who returned to running was far stronger than the one who had been injured. She had used forced hardship as a training ground for voluntary strength. Here's what's separating the strong from the weak in real terms. The strong have evidence that they can handle difficulty. The weak only have hope that they can avoid it. When you practice voluntary discomfort, you build an unshakable foundation of self-trust. Not hope, not believe, but know that you can handle whatever comes because you have already handled controlled versions of it. This knowledge transforms how you move through the world. You stop avoiding challenges and start seeing them as opportunities to use your strength. The first principle of Stoic hardship training is progressive difficulty. You don't start by sleeping outside in winter. You start by turning your thermostat down 2 degrees. You don't begin with week-long fasts. You start by skipping lunch. You don't immediately embrace major discomfort. You gradually increase your tolerance for minor inconveniences. Epictetus taught his students to begin with small sacrifices, drinking water instead of wine, eating simple food instead of elaborate meals, walking instead of riding. These small practices build the mental muscle needed for larger challenges. Second, you must practice discomfort while you are comfortable. This is crucial and counterintuitive. Most people only develop resilience when forced to by circumstances, but by then it's often too late. Real strength comes from choosing hardship when you have the option to choose ease. Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome. He could have had any luxury he wanted, which is precisely why his choice to live simply was so powerful. When you practice voluntary discomfort from a position of choice, you develop genuine strength rather than mere survival skills. Third, you must find meaning in the practice itself, not just in its results. The Stoics didn't endure hardship to show off or prove themselves to others. They embraced difficulty because they understood that the capacity to handle discomfort was inherently valuable. Every time you choose the harder path when an easier one is available, you are building character, developing discipline, and proving to yourself that you are stronger than your circumstances. This is not about becoming needlessly harsh with yourself. This is about becoming genuinely powerful. Jake was a software engineer who lived the most comfortable life imaginable. He worked from home, ordered all his food delivered, never experienced physical discomfort. and prided himself on optimizing away every inconvenience. When his relationship ended unexpectedly, he discovered how unprepared he was for emotional pain. He couldn't concentrate, couldn't work, couldn't function. His comfortable life had left him completely vulnerable to life's inevitable difficulties. That's when he discovered Stoic practices and decided to build the strength he should have developed years earlier. Jake started small. He began walking to the grocery store instead of ordering delivery. He took stairs instead of elevators. He set his phone aside for 2 hours every evening. He started doing push-ups when he felt stressed instead of reaching for entertainment. These tiny practices seemed insignificant, but they were building something crucial, proof that he could choose discomfort over ease. Within months, Jake was taking cold showers, exercising regularly, and had developed a meditation practice. More importantly, he had developed unshakable confidence in his ability to handle whatever life brought him. The ancient Stoics understood that there are 2 types of people in the world: those who are shaped by their circumstances and those who shape themselves before circumstances can. The first group lives at the mercy of external events, strong when things are easy and weak when things are hard. The second group maintains consistent strength regardless of external conditions because they have built internal resources that external events cannot touch. Voluntary discomfort is the bridge between these 2 states. It's how you transform from someone who hopes they can handle difficulty to someone who knows they can. Modern society sells you the lie that happiness comes from avoiding pain, maximizing pleasure, and eliminating all sources of discomfort. This is not just wrong, it's dangerously destructive. Every study of human resilience shows the same pattern. People who have experienced manageable hardship are happier, more confident, and more successful than those who have lived lives of pure comfort. The Stoics knew this thousands of years before modern psychology proved it scientifically. Seneca wrote, "Every new thing excites pleasure more than constant ones, so the man who has at some time done without many things has more sources of pleasure than one who has always had everything." This is not about becoming ascetic or rejecting all pleasure. This is about building the capacity to appreciate what you have and maintain strength regardless of external circumstances. When you know you can be happy with less, you become free from the anxiety of potentially losing what you have. Olivia learned this through a voluntary experiment that changed her entire worldview. She was successful, wealthy, and miserable. Despite having everything she thought she wanted, she felt anxious, unfulfilled, and constantly worried about losing what she had. Inspired by Stoic philosophy, she decided to spend 1 month living like a monk. Simple food, basic clothing, no entertainment, no luxury, just the essentials. Her friends thought she was having a breakdown, but something powerful was happening. For the first time in years, Olivia felt genuinely peaceful. She wasn't anxious about her possessions because she was proving she didn't need them for happiness. When she returned to her normal life, she had been transformed. She still enjoyed luxury, but she no longer needed it. This freedom from need gave her a strength and confidence that no amount of wealth could provide. The deepest truth about voluntary hardship is that it reveals the difference between what you think you need and what you actually need. Most of your daily stress comes from attachment to things that are ultimately unnecessary for your well-being. When you practice voluntary discomfort, you discover that you can be content, even happy, with far less than you imagined. This discovery is liberation. It frees you from the exhausting pursuit of things that cannot actually fulfill you and allows you to focus on developing the internal resources that can. Here's how you begin building this practice today. First, identify one daily comfort that you take for granted and deliberately give it up for a week. This might be your morning coffee, your usual transportation method, your evening entertainment routine, or your preferred sleeping arrangements. The key is choosing something that will be genuinely uncomfortable but not dangerous or harmful. The goal is not punishment but practice. You are training your mental muscle to handle discomfort gracefully. Second, add one deliberately difficult activity to your daily routine. This could be cold showers, regular fasting, physical exercise you dislike, or spending time in silence without any entertainment. The activity should be something you can control completely. You're not seeking out random hardship, but creating specific challenges that build specific strengths. Marcus Aurelius practiced this by regularly sleeping on the ground, even though he had access to the finest beds in the empire. Third, practice the Stoic exercise of voluntary poverty. Once a month, live below your means intentionally. Eat simple food, wear basic clothes, avoid all unnecessary purchases, and experience what your life would be like with significantly fewer resources. This isn't about becoming cheap or depriving yourself. This is about building confidence in your ability to be happy regardless of your circumstances. When you know you can thrive with less, you stop being controlled by the fear of loss. The ultimate goal of voluntary hardship is not to become someone who enjoys suffering. It's to become someone who is unafraid of it. There's a profound difference between these two states. The person who enjoys suffering is unbalanced and potentially self-destructive. The person who is unafraid of suffering is balanced, strong, and free. They can pursue meaningful goals without being paralyzed by the possibility of difficulty. They can love deeply without being destroyed by the possibility of loss. They can strive for excellence without being devastated by the possibility of failure. Adam discovered this distinction when he lost his job, his house, and his marriage within the same year. By any external measure, this was a disaster. But Adam had been practicing Stoic exercises for 3 years. Cold exposure, regular fasting, voluntary simplicity, and daily meditation on loss. When real hardship arrived, he found that he had been preparing for exactly this moment without knowing it. Instead of falling apart, he remained calm, focused, and immediately began rebuilding. His friends were amazed by his resilience, but Adam wasn't surprised. He had been building this strength deliberately for years. He knew he could handle difficulty because he had been handling smaller difficulties by choice. The forbidden aspect of Stoic suffering isn't the practices themselves. It's the mentality that makes them powerful. Modern culture teaches you to avoid all discomfort, to seek constant pleasure, and to believe that happiness comes from external circumstances. Stoicism teaches the opposite. True strength comes from within. Genuine happiness is independent of external conditions, and the capacity to handle hardship is the foundation of all other achievements. This message is forbidden because it undermines the entire consumer culture built on selling you solutions to problems that voluntary discomfort would solve for free. Every great achievement in human history has required the ability to persist through difficulty. Every meaningful relationship requires the capacity to handle conflict and disappointment. Every worthy goal involves setbacks and challenges. Every life worth living includes loss and hardship. The question is not whether you will face these realities. The question is whether you will be prepared for them when they arrive. The Stoics chose preparation over hope, training over wishful thinking, and voluntary strength over involuntary weakness. This is why the greatest philosophers in history deliberately chose difficulty over ease. They understood that strength is built through resistance, resilience is developed through practice, and freedom comes from knowing you can handle whatever life brings. They weren't trying to become hard or cold. They were trying to become unshakable. They weren't avoiding pleasure. They were building the foundation that would allow them to appreciate pleasure without being enslaved by it. They weren't seeking suffering. They were choosing to become the kind of people who could transform any suffering into strength. The path of voluntary hardship is not for everyone, but it is available to anyone willing to choose strength over comfort, preparation over hope, and internal development over external accumulation. The Stoics proved that this path leads to genuine freedom, unshakable confidence, and the kind of deep satisfaction that no external circumstances can touch or take away. The choice, as always, is entirely yours.